We're going to be in safety. We're not going to have to worry about any more war and terrorism. The prophet Ezekiel, Yechezkel, in his 37th chapter, I want to share this with you because it's probably the most compact passage that tells us exactly what this Messiah will be. Ezekiel, Yechezkel says, my servant David, God says his servant David will be a king over the Jewish people. And God says they will follow my ordinances and keep my decrees and fulfill them. The Bible says we're going to follow God's Torah. And then it says they will live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, in which your ancestors lived. They and their children and their children's children will live there forever. And my servant David will be their prince forever. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. And I will bless them, and I will multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary among them forevermore. They're going to have their holy temple. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations of the world will know that I am God, who sanctifies Israel when my sanctuary is among them forevermore. When will the world finally realize that God means business? It's when they see the Jewish people back in their land with their temple rebuilt. Now, what I would like to review now with you, what I think is very important, is to understand three things about this definition. Again, what I tried to show you very simply tonight is that there are two sets in the Bible. Set A is a big collection, a large collection of, let's say, approximately 100 or more passages in the Bible which speak about simply a transformed world, a utopian world. And then a smaller collection that describe the same transformed world, but also tell us there'll be a special king that will reign as the ruler of the Jewish people when all of that happens. So, the bottom line here is that what we see from the Bible is that the Messiah will be the wise and righteous descendant of King David, who will rule Israel as their king when the world has been transformed into a utopia. The important thing to understand, this is a fine point but an important point, is that the Bible does not spend a lot of time describing this person. There are only, let's say, 10 passages that speak about him. And all we know is that he will descend from David, he will be wise, he'll be righteous. But the Bible spends most of its time describing not the Messiah, but the Bible spends most of its time describing what the world will look like when the Messiah is here. That's the important thing to understand. That the emphasis in the Bible is describing what the world will look like when he, the Messiah, is here. So there are three parts to this chart that I want to go over with you now. Part number one is that this description I've just painted for you is exhaustive. By exhaustive, I mean that it uses up all the material in the Bible that describes a descendant of David who will come in the future. In other words, There is nothing else in the Bible. There is not one other description in the Bible of a descendant of David who will come in the future and do anything else. Now, why is this important? Because it's very obvious that Jesus, not just Jesus, no one has accomplished this. Right? Meaning that Christians often ask me, they'll say, if you don't believe in Jesus, they say, how will you know who the Messiah is? How will you know who the Messiah is? And I say, how will I know? It's very simple. I'll look out the window, I'll read the newspaper, and I'll see, have all these things happened? Again, what the Bible is telling us is, we will know who the Messiah is based upon whether or not the world has been transformed. So, if I see the Jewish people have returned to their land, they've built the temple, the whole world is chasing after the Jewish people, teach us please about God. All the Jewish people are observing the Torah. The whole world becomes believers in God, and all the weapons of war are destroyed and there's peace throughout the world. That's pretty obvious. I'll see that the Messiah has come. I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I went to a meeting of Christians. Most of them were very nice to me. One of them said to me, Rabbi Skobac, you Jews are very stupid. I was shocked. I said, why do you say that we are all very stupid? So he asked me a question. He said, who was the greatest rabbi that ever lived? So I said, I don't know, you tell me. He says, well, I'll tell you. The Jews are very stupid because they listen to what the rabbis teach. That's what he told me. He said, the Jews are very stupid because we listen to what the rabbis teach. I said, what's wrong with listening to the rabbis? So he said, well, wasn't Rabbi Akiva the greatest rabbi that ever lived? He wanted to know who I thought the greatest rabbi was. I don't know. He said, Rabbi Akiva, wasn't Rabbi Akiva the greatest rabbi that ever lived? And I said, Rabbi Akiva is probably in the top 10. So he said to me, well, Rabbi Skobac, didn't Rabbi Akiva make a very, very serious mistake when he assumed that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah? Now, in case you had not heard of Bar Kokhba, he was a Jewish general, and he led a rebellion against the Romans about 100 years after Jesus. And Rabbi Akiva pointed to him and said, he is going to be the Messiah. So this Christian said to me, look, if your greatest rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, was wrong about the Messiah, then maybe all the other rabbis are wrong for not believing in Jesus. And if all the rabbis are wrong for not believing in Jesus, he said, you Jews are very stupid for listening to the rabbis. That was his whole argument. So I smiled inside because this is a very famous story that happened to one of our great rabbis over 100 years ago, Rabbi Chaim of Brisk. It happened to him on a train. He heard a missionary talking to some Jews. I just said the same thing that the Rabbi Chaim of Brisk said. I asked this Christian the following question. I said, you're putting down all the Jews for listening to the rabbis because you assume that our greatest rabbi was wrong I said to this Christian, how do you know Rabbi Akiva was wrong? I asked this Christian, what makes you so sure that Rabbi Akiva was wrong? I said, how do you know that Bar Kokhba wasn't the Messiah? How do you know Bar Kokhba was not the Messiah? And the Christian looked at me and said, what are you talking about? Bar Kokhba, he was killed by the Romans and did not bring peace to the world. Well, I guess if it was so obvious that Bar Kokhba wasn't the Messiah because he was killed by the Romans and didn't bring peace to the world, that's the same exact thing that happened to Jesus. He was killed by the Romans and didn't bring peace to the world. So the problem basically at this point for Christianity is that we have in the Bible a very clear description of what the Messiah will be. And the primary thing to understand is that the Bible describes what the world will look like when the Messiah is here. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus came, the world did not look like this. The world did not meet any of these requirements. The world was still a broken world. The Jews were still suffering. There was war throughout the world. Not everybody believed in God. Most of the world were pagans. So it's very clear that the Bible has a job description. Jesus did not fulfill the job description. Why is it so important to say that this diagram is exhaustive, meaning there's nothing else in the Bible about a descendant of David who will come in the future? Because what I've done now in number 1 over here is to we've eliminated any alternative job description. Meaning, what the Christian cannot come to me now and say is, look, you have made a very pretty diagram here, but there are many, many other passages in the Bible that talk about this descendant of David, and he will do other things, right? And maybe Jesus did those things. The problem is there isn't anything else in the Bible about a descendant of David who will come in the future. So this description I've given you is exhaustive. There's not anything else in the Bible about a descendant of David who will come in the future. Number 2, this description that we've studied tonight is clear and consistent. Now this is very important to understand, not just for tonight, but for the rest of the class, for the rest of the next weeks. Because the question is, how do you know whether anything that you're studying, whether you're right, whether you really understand something properly? So I believe that in order to know that you understand the Bible properly, you can test that if your understanding is clear and consistent. Let me explain what this means. By clear, what I mean is that we are looking at passages where everyone agrees to what it means. There are some times when you read the Bible, and not just the Bible, sometimes you could read any text and not everybody agrees. Once everyone doesn't agree, right, then you could have your opinion, you could have your opinion. But here, we're dealing with passages which are clear. Now, how do we know when something is clear? We know something is clear when everyone agrees. When everyone agrees, it's clear. So the interesting thing is that when it comes to these passages, it's not just the Jewish people who say they are describing the Messiah. All the Christians agree with us. Everyone agrees, yes, these passages are speaking about the Messiah. That's how